brief introduction to play, serious games, and immersive technologies. I'm Professor Bill Kapralos, and I'm with the Maxim Health Group at Ontario Tech University in Oshawa, Canada. And over the next few minutes, I'm going to talk about serious gaming and immersive technologies with a focus on their use in medical education, health, and well-being. I'll begin with a brief introduction to myself. I'm an associate professor at Ontario Tech University within the game development program, and I've been there for the past 15 years. I'm also a faculty member within the Maxim Health Group at Ontario Tech University, and Maxim Health is an interconnected collective of manufacturing, design, and simulation labs at Ontario Tech University, led by Professor Adam Dabrowski. I'm also the technical lead of the Collaborative Human Immersive Interaction Laboratory, also known as CHISL, at Sunnybrook Health Sciences Centre in Toronto. My research interests include immersive technologies, serious gaming, multimodal virtual environments, perception of auditory events, and 3D spatial sound generation, and my educational background is in computer science. I have extensive experience in developing interactive virtual experiences, including serious games and virtual simulations for medical education, and have been doing this for the past about 14 years. I've also, authored many papers on the topic and have given, many presentations on the topic at various venues. Before beginning, I just want to point out a couple of things here. And first off is this fear of technology, which I've encountered over and over again over the last number of years that I've been doing this. And I just want to point out that the fear of technology is itself not a new phenomenon. We can go back, a couple thousand years ago to Socrates' time, and I'm going to quote him here: "This discovery of yours will create forgetfulness in the learner's souls, because they will not use their memories. They will trust to the external written characters and not remember of themselves." Here, Socrates was referring to the stylus or the pen, and this, of course, was the latest and greatest technology of that time. Related to this fear of technology, I'm going to present a quote by Marshall McLuhan, the famous Canadian philosopher. "Anyone who tries to make a distinction between education and entertainment doesn't know the first thing about either." And I'm going to ask that you keep that in mind as I progress through my presentation. We'll begin the presentation with a brief look at simulation. And of course, I'm making the assumption that you're all familiar with simulation, and in fact, you've either used simulation or currently using simulation within your profession. Simulation itself is definitely not a new phenomenon. In fact, it's quite old, dating back to several thousand years ago, where ancient Roman and Greek militaries used simulation to prepare soldiers for battle. It's widely used currently by the military, medicine, aviation, amongst many other industries. And it's widely used in sports. And a good example of its use in sports is boxing. So for example, a boxer will punch a heavy bag, and the heavy bag simulates an opponent. The current emphasis of simulation involves the use of immersive technologies, particularly when we consider medical and military training. And with respect to immersive technologies, I'm referring to virtual reality, augmented reality, and serious gaming in particular. And of course, we'll discuss this as we progress through the presentation. But before looking at immersive technologies, I'm going to start by looking briefly at play and games. What exactly is play? We can define play as engaging in an activity for enjoyment and recreation rather than for a serious or practical purpose. In other words, we're doing something simply because we enjoy it and because it's fun. Is there any use for play? This question is best answered by considering the animal kingdom, and in particular, we'll look at lions. Consider the sample images that I've listed below. If we consider the bottom three images, we look at lion cubs. Lion cubs in all three examples are playing. They're having fun. They're not in any danger. They're not hurting each other. If we consider the top three images, we look at a male lion taking down its prey. It follows a certain technique. And when it takes down prey, a lion reaches the animal from behind, places its front paw over the rump of the prey, and then it takes it down. If we look at that technique or that method, we see it's mimicked in the lion cubs when they're at play. In other words, play is their form of learning. Moving on to games. What is a game? Well, we can define a game as formalized play. In other words, it's play with added rules. Now, this is a uniquely human behavior, and it's associated with enhanced individual and group survival. If you look at games themselves, there's a penalty for failure in the game, and that penalty is much less than in the real world. In other words, there's plenty of learning that takes place within a game. Now, games themselves are also not a new phenomenon, and they go back to at least 4,500 years. There's many examples, including the game of Senet, ancient Egypt, and the royal game of in ancient Iraq. More recently, we look at the game of chess. Now, chess itself was designed specifically to train Indian military strategy to Indian military officers. Progressing along, we look at video games. Well, a video game is a game that happens to be played by electronically manipulating images produced by a computer program on a display. In other words, a video game is a game, except the medium has changed. There's plenty of learning that occurs when playing a video game. When you take any video game, in order to reach the end of the game, it certainly doesn't happen upon first try. In other words, there's a lot of trial and error and a lot of experimenting in order to reach the end of the game. You have to learn how to beat the enemies or the adversaries. The first video game, Space War, and it came out in 1961, and it simulated a space battle. And this actually became the precursor to the first commercial video game, which was known as Computer Space in 1971. Moving along, we have now serious games. Well, what exactly is a serious game? A serious game is simply a video game whose primary purpose is educational. In other words, we're taking advantage of video games that are able to captivate, motivate, and engage learners, and we're applying it specifically to education and training. And if you look at video games, whether it's kids, adults, even the elderly, they can play video games for hours on end. Yet, if we look at the typical lecture, how long is a student's attention span? Perhaps 30 minutes, an hour, maybe an hour and a half? Point being that we're able to attend to a video game for hours on end. So let's captivate and use that for educational purposes. The first likely serious game was Battlezone, and it was developed by Atari in 1980. Battlezone was designed to train U.S. Army gunners. And I just want to point out that the U.S. military has been a strong proponent of the use of video games to train soldiers for decades. So just to wrap this up, we've been using simulation for thousands of years. We've been playing games for thousands of years. So why not combine the motivational and engaging aspects of video games with simulation and learning? In other words, why can't learning be fun? And that's exactly what serious games do. They take simulations, they take games, they combine them, and we have an engaging and interactive learning experience that's able to captivate and obviously engage learners far more than existing methods. And this little diagram to the right over here, it's after Becker and Parker. If we look at games, every game is a simulation. Every serious game is itself a game, and therefore every serious game is a game and a simulation. If we look at serious game marketing trends, currently serious gaming is estimated to be a $3 billion global market, and it's anticipated that this will grow to about $8.1 billion by 2022. Now, there's some real big players in the serious gaming domain. Breakaway Games, for example, they're a US-based gaming company. They produce many serious games for the US military. In March of 2015, Ubisoft, one of the biggest video game makers in the world, with a strong presence here in Canada, announced Dig Rush. Now, Dig Rush is a serious game, and it's a therapeutic video game to treat amblyopia. Now, the interesting thing about Dig Rush is that you have to get it, or you can only get it by prescription. In other words, it's prescribed by a medical doctor. Moving on to immersive technologies. What exactly is immersive technology? Well, it's technology that blurs the line between the physical world and the digital or simulated world, thereby creating a sense of immersion. And here, immersion is key. And immersion is the state of being deeply engaged or involved. When we couple immersive technologies with serious games and virtual simulations, we can actually obtain some very engaging learning applications. Why all the hype recently? Well, there's a number of reasons. And in particular, we've recently, over the past 10 years or so, we've seen this increase in computational power. This, coupled with the decrease in the size of electronic components, has led to decreasing cost and rising availability of consumer-level immersive technologies. For example, immersive technologies such as head-mounted displays that allow you to experience a virtual world are currently in the $500 to $600 range, whereas about 20 years ago they were in the tens of thousands of dollars. So we now have more natural and immersive interactions given this increase in computational power and decrease in the size of electronic components. And this itself is fundamental because it helps us overcome the limitations associated with traditional keyboard and mouse-based human-computer interactions, where tasks are performed very differently to a real-life situation. 10 years ago, interacting within a virtual world was very non-natural, whereas now we're able to, using very simple camera-based technologies, detect gestures, for example, and we can interact with the virtual world in a more natural way. So what exactly is driving these advances in technology? Well, until now, it's really gaming and this quest for better and more realistic graphics by those game players that were playing first-person shooters. However, this is quickly changing. And coupling these immersive technologies with serious games, as I mentioned, we obtain very immersive, engaging, and interactive training experiences. And currently, this is a very big drive for immersive technologies. In fact, it has been suggested that virtual reality and augmented reality will drive a revolution in medical education and patient care. It's expected to play a large role under the following health applications: education and training, surgical planning, telemonitoring, patient experience, treatment and therapies, augmented reality enhanced surgery, and patient care. Of course, immersive technologies is also big business, and there's a large market share. There's tremendous opportunities across many industries, including education, medicine in general, including medical education, business, entertainment, and work from home, as the current COVID pandemic has shown us. Immersive technologies are not only used for training, but they're also being used currently for facilitating meetings. We can use virtual reality to take us from home into the office where we meet our other colleagues in the virtual realm. In fact, the immersive technology is forecasted to be a $209.2 billion industry by the year 2022, from the $27 billion market share in 2018. Let's look at a few examples of immersive technologies within the medical education realm. First example is the interactive virtual healthcare learning environment from Breakaway Games. This is an immersive realistic virtual environment for discovery-based learning and decision-making skills required to communicate effectively with a patient's clinical care team. I'll show a brief video that outlines the environment in further detail. Just keep in mind here that, of course, this was professionally developed, and there's plenty of time and effort that goes into the development of such simulations, virtual simulations, and there's also, a fairly big price tag associated with them as well. Next, I want to move on to virtual patients in medicine. And virtual patients are becoming more advanced and being explored not only in mental health as they were traditionally used. And there's plenty of advancements made with respect to these intelligent virtual patients that are able to detect user emotions and respond accordingly. And there's plenty of great work being done in this domain. And virtual patients can provide a flexible and creative platform to develop individual and group therapies, provide peer support, and offer potential to engage a large range of patients that requires psychological support but may otherwise be unable or unwilling to participate in traditional treatments. There's also studies that have shown that actual patients are far more open when they talk to an avatar taking on the role of a medical professional. Patients tend to be more honest and more forthcoming to them. Well, I just want to look at an example that I've been involved with, and this involves using immersive technologies in virtual worlds for anesthesia training. And this is work that I'm doing with Professor Fahad Alam at Sunnybrook Health Sciences Center, and of course my PhD student Kyle Wilcox. We've built or developed an anesthesia crisis scenario builder, and it allows medical educators to build or modify their own ACRM-based virtual sims. And of course here we're focusing only on the cognitive aspect. And for the most part, a large focus or large number of the immersive technology-based solutions for medical training have focused on the cognitive aspects, serious games as well. And that's because there are still many technical limitations and difficulties associated with using technology to simulate technical aspects. And I'll just show a brief video of this environment as well. So moving on to the future and some concluding remarks here, keep in mind that technology keeps improving. And if we look at currently, aside from what I've described in terms of immersive technologies, there's this whole movement with respect to makerspace. And that's where we have people build their own things. We have 3D printing. It's very affordable. We have open electronics such as Arduino that allow us to make things very easily. And this whole notion of makerspace is providing some really interesting opportunities. So for example, Boston Children's Hospital, they have a simulator programs engineering workshop. In other words, it's a makerspace. And they 3D print components and body parts, and they're able to incorporate that into their simulations. We do a lot of that work at the Maxim Health Lab that I'm involved with, and 3D printing is a large component of it. And as an example, we've 3D printed a surgical drill, and we've incorporated that into a consumer level gaming-based haptic device, and we're able to simulate surgical drilling. So as we come to closing here, I just want to point out that technology will continue improving and prices will come down even further. So this will create even further opportunities for developing some very engaging and interactive medical-based training applications. But of course, I should also point out that making an activity fun by just throwing some coating over it is not necessarily the best approach. In other words, consider chocolate-covered broccoli and Brussels sprouts. If we pour chocolate over broccoli or Brussels sprouts on the outside, it looks nice. But when you bite into it, it's still broccoli and Brussels sprouts. In other words, it's not just about using the latest and the greatest technology. You have to really consider proper design. And I can't stress the importance of the appropriate design prior to development. You have to consider many things, most importantly, your end users. Furthermore, testing is a must. Once you develop an interactive application, whether it's a serious game or virtual simulation, you have to ensure that it does indeed meet its objectives. In other words, you have to test. And finally, greater work remains, so this is definitely not the end. Thank you. And of course, if you have any further questions or require any further information regarding this topic, you're free to contact me at bill.capralos@uoit.ca.